thank the DIACs and EIC for giving me the opportunity to come here and tell my story. Well, I'll talk to groups, and I'll get up here and I'll say, you know what? I'm a recovering alcoholic. Who is it? I'm a recovering drug addict. I got a friend who's in rehab. I'm a recovering steroid addict. Legalize them. I was bulimic for 27 years. What? Everyone, silence. No, you weren't. Guys don't have eating disorders. I really was. No, you weren't. No, I really was. And that's the kind of reaction I get. And everyone, all the men, not necessarily all the men, take a few steps backwards. And I'm like, it's not contagious. So, and that's the stigma. That is what, that is the stigma of a male eating disorder. When in reality, 10 to 15% of all people who suffer from eating disorders are male. 800,000 men at some time in their life will be bulimic. For me, it was a journey to take me to there. And it was a journey that took me through more than eating disorders. It was a journey that started way back when in the 1960s when I was born, a time when gender roles were very defined. It was a much different time than it was today. My mom who was here and I had a difficult relationship. And we have a great relationship now. I'll preface that I'll follow that up by saying, but she had a difficult relationship with her mother. There was a lot of fat shaming by her mother, a word we didn't have then, a term we didn't have then. There was a lot of fat shaming and bullying type behavior with her mother. She had a difficult relationship. And as often is in these types of things, it runs generationally, it runs downhill. I had an older brother, most people know my older brother Mark. He was a very outgoing, type A. He was out selling garbage bags and newspapers at 15 years old. You knew what he was going to be, and he became that. And then my younger brother Jeff was the jock, nationally ranked wrestler at Mount Lebanon, and I was the middle child syndrome. I was shy, I didn't have a lot of friends, I tended to isolate, I was quiet, and words hurt me severely, and I internalized them. And so when you have these things said to you by your mom, that can have an effect. So the effect it had was I started eating more. I got depressed. My depression, as an 11-year-old, I was suffering from depression, which we didn't really talk about too much back then either. And so the more I started eating because I was depressed, then the bullying started at high school. I went to Mount Lebanon High School and Jefferson Junior High. The bullying over my weight. I had these gold shiny pants that Mark had given me, my older brother Mark, but they were too tight on me. And my stomach hung over them, and they didn't look good on me, but I loved them. I loved my brother. He gave them to me. I was proud of them. And kids made fun of them, but I wore them anyways. I didn't care. One day we're walking home, and they start making fun of the pants. They start pulling at them. Next thing I know, they're tearing them off me. Next thing I know, they tore off my pants and threw them in the street. Left me in my tighty-whities with my stomach hanging out, just a couple blocks from Jefferson Junior High in Mount Lebanon, with another mile home to walk to where we live on Bower Hill Road. And it was humiliating. It was so traumatic to me, that bullying episode, so traumatic that I could go to that spot today and show each of you exactly where it happened. I remember it like a movie. That's how traumatic it was. And by the time I got to Penn State, I was developing what is called body dysmorphic disorder. And what body dysmorphic disorder is when you have minor or non-existent defects in your body and you exaggerate them to the point where that affects your ability to function normally in life. You hear about people having hundreds of thousands of dollars of plastic surgery. People don't leave the house, and people commit suicide from it, from the depression that goes with it. And for me, it was my stomach, because that's where all the negative talk came from. That's where all the bullying came from. Every time I started looking in the mirror, as I became a freshman, I imagined this huge stomach, this feeling that I had this huge stomach, and it became this feeling I had to take care of it. I had to get rid of that. What can I do? Unless I do that, I will never be accepted. I will never be the guy that gets a date. I will never be the guy that gets to hold a girl's hand. I will never be the guy that got to go to the prom. I will never be the guy that gets to kiss a girl, because everyone thinks I'm fat and ugly. I started starving myself when I became anorexic and living on 500 calories a day. Became anorexic, but that didn't help. That didn't help, because body dysmorphic disorder, it was, I still saw this huge fat kid, this kid that wasn't going to be accepted, this kid that just wanted to be loved. It was never about how thin I could get, it was what can I do to be accepted. When that wasn't working, I'm like, I'm getting thin, I'm losing all this weight, I'm still heavy. I decided I'm going to try something else. I became bulimic. And I stayed bulimic for 27 years until I was 45 years old. And beyond that, the journey continues into the abyss. That wasn't working. Every time I engaged in that behavior, there was that guy in the mirror again, that heavy guy in the mirror. How can I change that? I started abusing drugs. I became a drug addict. Still wasn't working. I became an alcoholic. Still wasn't working. I became a steroid addict. This behavior wheel of destructive behaviors, just trying to change this distorted image in the mirror that all related back to bullying and fat shaming and who I was as a person. Finally, it got to such a low point where I became so hopeless that this would never change. I felt so alone. I felt so alone with my eating disorders. There was no one else in the world going through it in my mind. No one else in the world going through my alcoholism. No one else in the world going through my drug addiction. I felt completely alone and hopeless that it would ever change, that image would ever change. I decided I was going to step into the abyss, and I became suicidal. And I became suicidal when it went from ideology to thoughts about action, and I was literally saved at the last second by my two brothers who came into my house, and I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. It was literally movie saved at the last second. It continued for a while before I finally hit a complete low point, standing in the parking lot of a psychiatric facility for my second time, thinking, you know what? I either won't be back here because I won't be around, but even more important than that, the thing that terrified me, more important than that was that I was about to lose the love of my family, my two brothers, my father, and my mother, of course. And my mother became a very instrumental part of my recovery. I'll talk about that because she was willing to explore with me how I got there. And I feel very lucky that she was, because a lot of families don't have that. There's a lot of denial. It wasn't my fault. I'm not going to talk about this. I was lucky that wasn't my mother. She was willing to talk about it, and that was an instrumental part of my recovery. So I finally got honest. The first step in recovery, honesty. Honest about where I was and honest about how I got there. And getting honest wasn't only about my doctor. The next day, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was April 9th, 2007. I went over at that time, 85-year-old father's house. He knew nothing about any of this, nothing. Eating disorders, drug addiction, alcoholism, he knew nothing. I said, Dad, I need to talk to you. He said, what about? I said, I'm in trouble. There's been a lot of stuff going on that you don't know about. And I just unloaded. I became that 11-year-old boy that wanted so badly to tell his father of his shame and his pain and the bullying back then, but was too ashamed, because boys don't talk about that. We're men. We don't talk about that. We have sports. We do this. We play football. We don't talk about our shame and our bullying and our depression. And his response was the response that I just wanted back then, but was too afraid to ask for. It was, Brian, I love you. We'll get through this. Come live with me. I've been in therapy for over 10 years. And I'm not ashamed to tell people that, because there's no, I'm not going to play into the stigma. I am. I've been in therapy for over 10 years. I take medication to control both depression and my obsessive compulsive disorder that goes with body dysmorphic disorder. It is what it is. And there's no shame. And once I started taking those steps into recovery, every other little step, regardless whether it was hard or whether it was easy, meant something. And people ask me today, they say, are you cured? Sure, I still have body image negative thoughts, but I process them differently. I've learned through a lot of therapy that I am not my thoughts, that it's okay to speak up about mental illness, about my psychological problems, that it's okay to let people know, hey, I'm out there. I now know how to love. I now know how to let love in. I now trust. So from that standpoint, yeah, I'm cured, because that's what cured means to me. When the media does not portray it in a realistic light and portray it as it really is, it causes people to have an unrealistic view. Then they really feel ashamed. They hold it in. They don't seek treatment. and then it manifests itself in some, possibly in some terrible way, or just in a life of loneliness, or, stepping into the abyss. So I appreciate you allowing me to tell my story of recovery and my view on breaking the stigma using the media, and I appreciate the media's willingness to do that. Thank you.